You know what's funny? We spent 500 years calling the Amazon virgin forest, pristine, untouched, a green hell where nobody could survive. Turns out we were just bad at looking, because in 1491, 1 year before Columbus gets lost and calls it India, there are more people living in the Amazon basin than in all of Europe. Cities, roads, farms, an entire civilization that we somehow managed to miss completely. Not because it wasn't there, because we killed everyone before we bothered to count them. Let's start with numbers, because numbers don't lie the way textbooks do. The current scientific consensus, based on soil samples, satellite imaging, and LiDAR scans that can see through jungle canopy, puts the pre-Columbian Amazon population between 8 and 20 million people. Some estimates go higher. The entire population of the Americas in 1491, somewhere between 50 and 100 million. For context, Europe in 1491 has about 70 million people. The Amazon alone is running a population density that rivals medieval France. Except it's not in stone castles. It's under 200 feet of trees, and it's built from materials that rot, which is why we missed it. The LiDAR doesn't lie. In 2018, archaeologists fly grid patterns over the Bolivian Amazon with laser imaging equipment. The lasers punch through the canopy and map the ground. What they find? Earthworks. Thousands of them. Geoglyphs. Geometric shapes carved into the earth, some over 1,000 feet across. Causeways. Moats, raised platforms, square miles of interconnected structures. In the upper Xingu region, evidence of fortified settlements in a ring pattern, each supporting populations between 2,000 and 5,000 people. They're connected by roads, not paths. Roads, straight, engineered, some over 60 feet wide. The math is simple. You don't build roads that big unless you have traffic, trade, movement, logistics. This is infrastructure. And here's the kicker. When the first Europeans show up in the 1540s, they see it. Francisco de Orellana, floating down the Amazon River, writes about very large settlements and many roads and populations so dense they stretched for miles. We called him a liar for 400 years. Turns out he was just describing what was there. The Terra Preta tells the whole story if you know how to read it. Black Earth, Terra Preta do Indio. It covers an estimated 10% of the Amazon basin. That's roughly 154,000 square kilometers. For scale, that's larger than England. This soil didn't happen naturally. The chemical composition is wrong. Too much charcoal, too much phosphorus, too much calcium. Pottery shards mixed throughout, down to 3 feet deep in some locations. Core samples show the accumulation rate, approximately 1 centimeter per year in active areas. Some deposits are 2 meters deep. Basic math puts continuous occupation and soil enhancement at 2,000 years in certain locations. That's not a campsite. That's permanent urban settlement. The process is elegant. Controlled burns of biomass create biochar, charcoal that's been heated in low oxygen conditions. The porous structure holds nutrients and water. Mix it with organic waste, bone, fish remains, and broken ceramics. The result? Soil that stays fertile for centuries instead of depleting after 3 harvest cycles like normal Amazonian clay. They weren't just living in the jungle, they were engineering it. The population density models work backward from carrying capacity. Take the Terra Preta distribution. Add fish protein from managed aquaculture. Yes, they had fish farming. We found the retention ponds. Add manioc cultivation, the root crop that produces 3 times the calories per acre that wheat does. Add turtle harvesting from controlled breeding beaches. Add palm fruit cultivation from intentionally planted groves that still exist in geometric patterns under the canopy. Run the numbers. 250 people per square kilometer in prime habitation zones. For comparison, modern rural Brazil runs about 20 people per square kilometer. The Amazon in 1491 is more densely populated than the Amazon in 2026. Let that sink in. The road networks prove complex social organization. We're not talking about footpaths. The causeways in the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia are elevated earthworks, some 16 feet high and over 60 feet wide, running for miles in straight lines. They're connected to raised platform mounds, foundations for buildings and plazas that stayed above flood level during the wet season. Survey data from 2022 identifies over 4,700 kilometers of these causeways in a single region. The engineering is sophisticated. Drainage channels parallel to the roads, crossing points with bridges. junctions with clear traffic logic. You don't build this for a few hundred people wandering around. You build this for economic networks, trade routes, movement of goods and people on a scale that requires planning and labor coordination, which means hierarchy, administration, government. The settlement patterns show deliberate planning. Excavations in the Upper Xingu reveal communities arranged in radial patterns, concentric circles of houses around central plazas, with the plaza always oriented north-south. The spacing is consistent. Houses every 30 meters, roads every 100 meters. Zoning, urban planning, building codes. One site, Kuhikugu, shows evidence of supporting 5,000 people at its peak. The plaza alone is 500 feet across. Around it, defensive ditches, palisade walls, elevated platforms, storage facilities with controlled moisture and temperature. Basically, warehouses. And Kuhikugu isn't unique. It's part of a network of 19 interconnected settlements covering approximately 20,000 square kilometers. That's not a tribe. That's a civilization. The agriculture was industrial scale. Forget slash and burn. These aren't temporary clearings. Survey data shows permanent field systems with boundaries, irrigation channels, and rotation schedules visible in soil stratification. In the Beni region of Bolivia, raised field agriculture covering 6,000 square kilometers, rectangular plots, each about 15 by 200 meters, elevated above the water table with drainage canals between them. The math on labor investment, approximately 10,000 person-hours per square kilometer to construct. That's infrastructure investment on a state level. And it works. Modern reconstruction tests show these raised fields produce 3 harvests per year with yields higher than contemporary industrial farming in the same region. They outfarmed us using mud and geometry. The fish management was systematic. Along the Tapajos River, we find evidence of constructed ponds, artificial water features with controlled inlets and outlets. Radiocarbon dating puts construction between 900 and 1400 CE. The size, some over 10,000 square meters. These aren't decorative. Bone analysis from midden heaps shows year-round fish consumption at rates that exceed what you'd get from river fishing alone. The species composition, predominantly pirarucu and tambaqui, both large fish that adapt well to pond cultivation. They were farming fish 500 years before European naturalists discovered aquaculture in the Amazon. The forest composition itself proves human management. Botanical surveys reveal something strange. The distribution of useful plant species in the Amazon is non-random. Fruit trees cluster around archaeological sites. Brazil nut groves appear in geometric patterns. Palms that produce edible hearts grow in densities that don't occur naturally. Genetic analysis confirms it. These are cultivated varieties, not wild types. The distribution maps match settlement patterns. The trees are planted, managed, harvested. Estimates suggest 12% of the Amazon's tree biomass consists of species directly useful to humans, concentrated in areas of known habitation. They didn't live in the forest, they designed it. The ceramic production was industrialized. At Santarém, archaeologists excavate pottery middens containing millions of sherds. The standardization is striking. Identical vessel forms, repeated decorative motifs, consistent clay composition. That's mass production. Workshops, specialist craftspeople, quality control, thermoluminescence dating and chemical sourcing prove trade. Ceramics from Santarém appear in sites over 1,000 kilometers away. The distribution network reaches from the Andes to the Atlantic coast. That's not barter. That's commerce, market economy, professional merchants. The infrastructure for this scale of trade, those roads we talked about, storage facilities, standardized measures. We find repeated patterns in ceramic volumes that suggest unit standardization. They had economics. The defensive structures indicate organized warfare. In the Acre region, we find fortified settlements with concentric defensive rings, multiple layers of ditches and palisades. The inner ditches are 16 feet deep and 40 feet wide. The excavated volume per site, over 50,000 cubic meters. Labor calculation, approximately 1 million person-hours per fortification. You don't invest that unless the threat is real and organized, not raids, war, territorial conflict between structured political entities. The distribution of these forts suggests border zones, defensive lines, contested territory between competing states, which means multiple states, political complexity, diplomacy, and conflict on a regional scale. The population collapse was mathematically precise. When the diseases hit, and they hit before significant European contact in most areas, the mortality rate follows a predictable curve. Zero immunity means 70 to 90% mortality in the first wave. Smallpox primarily. It spreads through trade networks before conquistadors ever show up. The second wave hits 30 years later. Measles, typhus, influenza, another 50% of survivors. Third wave, complications, secondary infections, societal collapse leading to famine, another 30%. Run the numbers. A population of 10 million in 1491 becomes 150,000 by 1600. The infrastructure doesn't disappear immediately. The roads remain visible. The fields stay cleared. But without maintenance, the jungle reclaims everything within 50 years. By 1650, when European explorers penetrate the interior, they find pristine wilderness. They assume it's always been that way. They're walking through a graveyard. The ecological transformation was total. Without human management, the forest composition shifts. The cultivated species remain but stop spreading. Wild species fill the gaps. Within 200 years, the anthropogenic forest becomes indistinguishable from natural jungle to casual observation. The terra preta persists because soil doesn't die. The earthworks remain because geometry doesn't rot. The raised fields are still visible because mud doesn't decompose, but the people are gone. The historical record reflects the bias. Spanish and Portuguese accounts from the 1540s describe large populations. By the 1600s, those same regions are reported as empty. European scholars assumed the earlier accounts were exaggerated. They weren't. The exaggeration is thinking the jungle was empty. The archaeological evidence accumulated slowly because we weren't looking for it. Until the 1980s, Amazon archaeology focused on river edges, areas accessible by boat. The assumption? Interior jungle was uninhabitable. Then remote sensing technology improved. Satellite imagery, radar penetration, LiDAR. Suddenly, we're finding earthworks everywhere. Sites under the canopy, geometric patterns invisible from the ground, infrastructure hidden under centuries of vegetation. Each new survey reveals more structures, more roads, more settlements. Current estimates suggest we've identified less than 10% of what's actually there. The implications are uncomfortable. For 500 years, Western science operated on the assumption that the Americas were sparsely populated before European contact. That complex civilization was limited to the Aztecs, Maya, and Inca, that most of the hemisphere was wilderness. This assumption justified colonization, justified displacement, justified the narrative that Europeans brought civilization to an empty land. The assumption was wrong. The Amazon basin alone contained a population rivaling Europe, with cities, trade networks, agriculture, engineering, art, politics, war, everything that defines civilization. We missed it because we killed them before we learned to count them, and then we forgot they existed. The forest we call pristine is actually a monument, a mass grave covered in trees. The natural biodiversity we're trying to save includes cultivated species planted by millions of people who aren't there anymore. The entire ecosystem is an artifact. The recovery is ongoing but incomplete. Indigenous populations in the Amazon today number around 1 million. Descendants of survivors, isolated groups that avoided contact, refugees from the collapse. Many retain knowledge of terra preta production, of forest management, of fish cultivation, knowledge that survived 500 years of apocalypse. Western science is now learning from them what their ancestors knew in 1491. We're rediscovering techniques they invented 2,000 years ago. The carbon sequestration implications are significant. Terra preta sequesters carbon in stable form for millennia. The charcoal structure locks it away. Modern attempts to replicate this biochar technology are essentially copying pre-Columbian Amazonian innovation. If the soil enhancement was as widespread as current evidence suggests, the pre-Columbian Amazon was sequestering carbon at industrial scale, which means the population collapse contributed to climate change. The reforestation of abandoned fields absorbed CO2, but the loss of active terra preta production and the decay of biomass released stored carbon. The depopulation of the Americas caused a measurable dip in global CO2 levels in the 1600s. Scientists call it the Orbeez spike. Reverse terraforming. We accidentally geoengineered the planet by dying. The urban planning sophistication rivals old world cities. Kuhikugu's radial design with central plaza and organized streets matches Greek city planning. The raised field agriculture in Bolivia compares to Dutch polder systems. The road networks equal Roman engineering in scope, but it's different, built with different materials, different environmental constraints, different solutions to the same problems. They invented urban civilization independently and made it work in the world's largest rainforest. Then we erased it. The pottery evidence indicates artistic tradition. Marajoara ceramics from the Amazon Delta, elaborate urns with geometric patterns and anthropomorphic designs, date to between 400 and 1400 CE. The craftsmanship rivals anything from contemporary Europe or Asia. Tapajos ceramics show standardized forms with regional variation, evidence of cultural identity and artistic schools. These aren't primitive crafts. This is high art from a developed culture with leisure time for aesthetic production. The botanical modification was comprehensive. Genetic analysis of modern Amazon tree species shows evidence of selective breeding in dozens of useful plants. Enhanced fruit size in palms, increased nut production in Brazil nut trees, modified growing patterns in cacao. The wild Amazon forest is actually a cultivated garden that's been growing without gardeners for 500 years. Estimates suggest it would take 4,000 years for the forest to return to truly natural composition without human intervention. We won't live long enough to see actual virgin Amazon rainforest. The ceramic chronology reveals continuous occupation. Stratified sites show unbroken habitation sequences spanning over 2,000 years in some locations. Pottery styles evolve gradually. No sudden population replacements, no mysterious collapses. Just continuous urban civilization for 2 millennia, then silence after 1550. The geoglyph purpose remains partially unknown. The massive geometric earthworks in acre, squares, circles, hexagons covering hundreds of acres don't fit obvious functions. Too large for practical defense. Wrong layout for agriculture. No residential structures inside most of them. Theories, ceremonial centers, astronomical markers, territorial boundaries, social gathering spaces. Whatever they were, they required massive labor investment. Thousands of people working for years. Coordinated effort on a scale that requires state-level organization. You don't build Stonehenge without a kingdom. The wood construction explains archaeological invisibility. Unlike stone cities in Mexico or Peru, Amazon settlements used wood, posts, beams, thatch. Materials that decompose completely in tropical conditions within 50 years. The structures were sophisticated, multi-story buildings in some cases, but they left almost no trace except post holes and foundation patterns. We're finding cities by looking for gaps in the soil where posts used to be. The hydrological engineering was advanced. Canal systems with controlled water flow, reservoirs with clay-lined bottoms to prevent seepage, aqueducts that moved water uphill using gravity and geometry. One canal system in the Llanos de Mojos runs over 300 kilometers, connecting multiple settlements and managing seasonal flooding. The mathematics required to survey and construct this over that distance without modern instruments. Sophisticated. They had engineering schools. The social stratification is evident in burial patterns. Elite burials with ceramic offerings, jade ornaments, and featherwork. Common burials with minimal goods. Slave burials, yes, they had slavery, with no offerings and often showing signs of violent death. Class systems, wealth inequality, power structures, all the complexity and ugliness that comes with civilization. They weren't noble savages living in harmony. They were people, building empires, fighting wars, creating art, enslaving enemies. Exactly like every other civilization in history, the climate data shows human influence. Ice core records from Andean glaciers show charcoal deposits correlating with known occupation periods. Pollen analysis reveals shifts in forest composition matching agricultural expansion. Then after 1550, sudden return to pre-human forest patterns. The signal is global. The Americas were so densely populated that the die-off changed atmospheric composition worldwide. We left a mark in the ice that'll last 100,000 years. The continuity exists in indigenous knowledge. The Quikro people in the Upper Xingu still occupy the same region their ancestors built Kuhikugu. They remember the settlement locations. They know which areas have terra preta. They maintain some of the same agricultural techniques. 500 years of apocalypse didn't erase the knowledge, it just reduced the population using it. When archaeologists excavate Kuhikugu, Kwikuro elders tell them where to dig. The ancestors are still there, under the trees, waiting to be remembered. The revised timeline changes everything. If the Amazon supported 10 to 20 million people in 1491, the total American population approaches 100 million. That's more than Europe, more than Africa, second only to Asia. The Americas weren't a new world discovered by Europeans. They were a fully populated world that experienced the worst demographic catastrophe in human history. 90% mortality, 90 million dead in a century, not from war, from disease. The conquistadors didn't conquer the Americas. Smallpox did. The numbers don't lie. The earthworks remain. The terra preta persists. The roads are still visible under the jungle. The people are gone. But the evidence of their existence covers thousands of square kilometers. We called it wilderness because we didn't know what we were looking at. Now we do. The Amazon in 1491 wasn't pristine nature. It was home to millions. Then it became a graveyard, and we forgot it was ever anything else.